all the useful information that we have to look forward to. Ms. Jackson, I'm going to turn this over to you and have you introduce yourself and give us your background while we get organized with the slides here.
Okay, so my name is Carla Smith-Jackson. I'm the Senior Procurement Executive. I'm also Assistant Administrator for Procurement at NASA and the Deputy Chief Acquisition Officer for NASA. So we're not going to do the video because that's not working, but when you do get the slides, you will be able to see that video and you can click on that. But what I wanted to share with you, my background is about 31 years in procurement, federal procurement, most of it with the Department of Defense, so Defense Threat Reduction Agency, as well as Missile Defense Agency, Ballistic Missile Defense Agency, Defense Contract Management Agency, Defense Logistics Agency, United States Coast Guard, Department of Homeland Security, and then with NASA. Now for just about a year and a half, a little over a year and a half, I've been with NASA. So first I want to start a little bit about the mission and functions of NASA. So NASA is the manager and the chief agency responsible for the America's Civil Space Program. And we are a global leader in space exploration. You can see there the NASA mission. Many of you are familiar with NASA's vision, which is to benefit all mankind. And that has remained the same since we were first. Can you guys see the slide? No? I had them and then they're gone, but as long as everybody else can see them.
Yes, we can see them, Carla. We can see them.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then, okay, great. All right. So with respect to that, you know, we were formulated in 1958. Like I said, for the benefit of all mankind was our vision in the beginning, and it still is our vision. We have about 18,000 people in the agency, thereabouts. And last year, our budget was about $24 billion. We do expect this year's budget to be in the neighborhood of $30 million, at least. We won't know till it's finally approved and authorized, but that's what we're looking at for right now. And I can go to the next slide. So I wanted to talk about a little bit about how we are formulated, and NASA's organized in mission directorates. This is how we do business. So we actually have 6 mission directorates. We have aeronautics. We have, and aeronautics is like the aviation industry and ways for us to move forward with research for the aeronautics industry. In air transportation. The second area that we do operate in is exploration systems. So exploration systems is where you will find all of our deep space research. Things like, I think we were all hoping for the Artemis 1 launch to go off this past week, but they manage that program as well as a number of other programs. For instance, all of the human landing and all of the Orion, Gateway, all of those kinds of programs are managed out of exploration systems, to include the next generation spacesuits called EVAS. And then we have space operations. Space operations, they're the sustaining part of space. It used to be called HEO, exploration systems and space operations were together, and human exploration, it was one big mission directorate. We broke it apart because the mission had grown in such a way that our sustaining space operations in low Earth orbit, things like the International Space Station, as well as once we get some of these systems developed, the sustaining activities will take place in space operations. So a number of you, as we prepared for SLS, with the SLS rocket, is going to be transitioned to space operations, and we're in the process of doing that, and actually awarding a new contract on a sole source basis that will be a single integrated contract for heavy lift services, as opposed to buying hardware. And then the other directorate that many of you are familiar with is science. So the science director is where we work with the nation's science community, a lot of research and institutional contractors, as well as we look at, we do our space satellites and probes in this area. So things like the James Webb Space Telescope was generated, and that's a picture there from the Space Telescope there. And then we do a lot of international collaboration out of the science area. And then we have space technology, which is our innovation. It's where we will do business in the future, you know, transformative technologies. And so that is where that particular work is done, as well as our small business innovative research and STTR contracts. Some of you might be familiar with our Tipping Point next generation research projects. Those are all done out of space technology. So where you have innovation or innovative ways of doing things, they have like some of the prizes and different broad agency announcements. Those are also done out of space technology. And then mission support. That's actually our sixth mission area. Mission support is the kind of like the underpinning of how we do business and how we accomplish our mission. So that's in areas like IT or HR work, procurement, I sit there, security, logistics, and shared services across the agencies. So now I want to transition, that was NASA kind of in a nutshell, want to transition to the Office of Procurement. So the next slide, please. This is our org chart in Office of Procurement. Pretty much you can see myself at the top as a senior procurement executive and my acting deputy, Marvin Horn there. We're both members of senior executive service. And then we have 3 operational divisions, or I should say headquarters support divisions. We have a brand new division called Enterprise Services and Analysis. And then we have our procurement strategic operations division, where we manage all of our basically the big ticket strategic capabilities across the enterprise in each one of those mission areas. And then we have our policy program and procurement management and policy division. And we just assumed responsibility in July for grants and cooperative agreements. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later. Underneath there, you can see each one of my operational procurement officers. So those are the most senior contracting people in each one of the centers. And I won't go over all the names, but you can see them and their locations there. And then if we go to the next slide, you can see where we're located geographically. So NASA is all over the continental United States. Everywhere from Cleveland, which is where Glenn Research is, all the way down to Kennedy, where our launch pad was, and many of you are watching Artemis 1. And then we have Marshall out in Huntsville, going on around to Johnson Space Center in Texas. And then we have some smaller centers in California, Armstrong and Ames. And then our Jet Propulsion Laboratory is our FFRDC, Federally Funded Research Center. Many of you may be familiar with that. Our largest center is actually Goddard Space Flight Center, and that's here in the DC metropolitan area. That's where I am, because I'm located at NASA headquarters, which is in headquarters. NASA headquarters, which is in Washington, DC. And then Langley, I'll just mention, is what we call our mother center, because that was one of the very first, if not the first, NASA center, and that's located in the Hampton Roads area. So let's go to the next slide. I wanted to talk a minute about procurement transformation and what's going on with our procurement function at NASA. So we had a few objectives about basically getting to be more efficient. As we transform procurement, we were concerned about collaboration with both headquarters, mission directorates, and centers. We were looking to have a more efficient operation and leverage our resources throughout the enterprise. To meet both current and future needs. Heavy focus on future needs. What is NASA of the future? NASA 2040 is a project that we're working on. What's it going to look like? How is NASA going to operate in the future? And in order to effectively, I'll say, meet those needs, we needed to transform. We wanted to align our mission operations with agency objectives at a strategic level. Up until about 3 years ago, each center was pretty much decentralized and operated independently. Now we're operating as a single uniform enterprise with execution locations being the centers. We also realigned our budget authority from the centers for enterprise functions like procurement, like HR, like IT, like logistics, to a central area of responsibility aligned with the most senior executive in that functional area at the headquarters, like myself as a senior procurement executive. And then I did mention my organization. I have heads of contracting activity that execute at the centers. So we set the strategic direction at the headquarters, and then execution is decentralized and done at each one of the centers. So we can go to the next slide, please. And this just talks a little bit about the drivers that, why did we change? I kind of hit on a few of these things, but we did see over time, about 3 years ago, declining resources, especially in our mission support areas, where our budget wasn't really growing. We were getting more mission budget, but we really did have a lot of pressure, and we still do, with respect to mission support functions I talked about before. One of those is institutional contracting requirements. Things like engineering services, like logistics support services, like our, our aircraft operations services, even down to facilities and administrative support services, grounds maintenance services and the like. So we call those product service lines. We have 26 of those, and we'll talk a little bit more about those, but that has completely transformed how we procure enterprise and institutional services. We've seen significant savings by either procuring at the enterprise level across the enterprise or at a regional level in most of those areas. We did experience some high fixed costs, and that was in the area of infrastructure, which we talked about the idea that they were managed across the center, and we had a high cost of operations because each one of those were done in a decentralized manner. We experienced some duplication of services, meaning many of the centers were delivering the same services in a duplicative manner, and we were able to consolidate those services and those offerings so that we could conserve funds. The biggest example of that is in the IT service arena. And then we were not sharing employee talent. In fact, just the opposite. We were kind of hoarding talent at each center as opposed to sharing talent across the center, across the centers and across the mission areas. And then based on that hoarding of resources, we saw many inequities across the centers based on the location of the center, meaning the type of work that they were charged with doing, the size of the workforce, and the size of their budget. So by looking at this in an enterprise way, we're able to share those resources, meaning for training, sharing of talent, as well as opportunities for our employees and our contractors by organizing in this way. So in order to enable, I would say in year 3, the success of the procurement enterprise, we had like 4 or 5 different initiatives that we're closing out for FY22. So let's go to the next slide here. So one of the biggest objectives we had was having the same experience from a procurement perspective, no matter whether you do business with, say, Johnson Space Center, Goddard Space Flight Center, or say Ames Research Center. And so we've standardized all of our policies, but we've customized where appropriate. So some things done at a research center are going to be decidedly different than the things that are done at a space or a space flight center. So that's where the customization occurs where appropriate. We have institutionalized this concept and operation of enterprise management, both in an HR management as far as employees and talent. And we talked about our budget. And then we talked about shared, say, IT resources, things like pricing. We have a shared pricing function now. We're looking at a shared way to implement innovations and even engagement with industry. We have embarked and completed an amplified communication strategy with different councils, different activities and associations, as well as the Hill Office of Management and Budget, and with our other federal procurement partners. We've strengthened program management, and that's one of the hats that I wear as Deputy Chief Acquisition Officer. The Chief Acquisition Officer is Deputy Administrator Pam Melroy. And so by having a strong partnership with program management and procurement, we've been able to put more rigor, more policy in place as it regards or relates to program management, procedures, and then align decision-making with program management. So that is acquisition decision-making as well as procurement decision-making, and that alignment for execution has been invaluable. And then we've invested many more dollars in workforce training and leadership development for succession planning in our next generation of leaders. So let's go to the next slide. This is what I affectionately call NASA by the numbers. I'm not going to go over everything on this slide, but wanted to make sure that you could see our budget has generally been in an upward trend. In FY22, I mentioned we had 24 billion. So this just ends with year end 21. So we'll be adding the FY22 information here in another couple of weeks. But we did have 19.2 billion in total obligations in FY21 and over 25,000 actions. Now we do work with the Office of Management Budget with spend under management. Many of you may be familiar with category management, best in class contracts. We use multiple award contracts, and the best in class contracts are designated by OMB, and we try to leverage that spend and strategically source where it makes sense. And so we have exceeded our FY21 goal of we're at 5.7 billion. We had a goal of 4.8 billion. Now next year we're going to be getting a larger goal will be given to us, and it's going to be dollar based as opposed to percentage based. So then you can also see the distribution of work by business there in the lower right as well. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so wanted to just briefly hit on when we met with Rena, we did our kind of pre-meet. Want to make sure you guys understood the myriad of types of ways that we do acquire goods and services. So the types of things we do buy supplies, we buy products or hardware. And many of our hardware buys, we're buying hardware as a service now. So instead of say buying, I'll say a human landing system, we're buying it as a recurring service. So we're buying a service, we're paying for the development, and then we're paying for the testing, prototyping, fielding, and then we'll continue to pay as a service for the back and forth sustaining ability of that service to carry a crew back and forth to the moon, and then ultimately Mars for one example. I mentioned product service lines. These are institutional services that I talked about before, but they're services that cross-cut all of the NASA operations. The services that support individual programs are still contained within those programs for the most part, but there are services that go across both the programs and the centers that are procured there. And then we have simplified acquisitions. So our NASA shared services organization does buy those there at NSSC, which is down at Stennis Space Center. So one of the other things that's not listed as far as types of things we buy, it's not explicitly called out, but it's research and development. And so we buy research and development. I mentioned on small business innovative research contracts, the small business technology transfer contracts. And then we also have just research contracts that might be procured under a BAA, which is under the FAR, like a contract, or it could be procured with a cooperative agreement or grant using the OMB circular authority for grants and cooperative agreements. When we do procure using contracts, we do use FAR Part 15, which is the traditional contracting by negotiation. From time to time, we'll leverage FAR Part 12, which is commercial procurement, either commercial services or commercial products. And then we do also use FAR Part 8, which will be the GSA schedule buys or multiple award type buys. And then the last category of things that we use, the types of instruments that we use would be funded Space Act. So that's a typo. We need to change. It should be types of instruments we use. Funded Space Act agreements is a special authority. It's an other transaction authority that we were given pretty much at the inception of NASA under the Space Act, when the Space Act was signed. The hook there with Funded Space Act agreements is that they must have their purpose cannot be for direct benefit of NASA. It has to be for the space industry or the commercial space industry in total. So NASA can benefit from that particular investment and that particular agreement, but it can't be for direct benefit. So we're right now pursuing legislative authority to be able to use other transaction agreements similar to what DoD does, where we would be able to do one competition for a demonstration or prototype and move all the way through production / sustainment using that authority, but we do not have that yet. So in many cases, we'll start some of the development work on a BAA using a contract, and then at the point that we go to sustaining services or production type services, we will do another competition and then issue another contract for that next phase. By getting that legislative ability to do that, what we'll be able to do is to do one competition, and we can even procure it in phases, but we won't have to stop and then resolicit for later phases of particular programs. So rounding out the next chart, just wanted to hit on this Executive Order 13985. You can go to the next chart, please. And this is what's affectionately called racial equity in procurement. This was issued, I believe it actually was the 21st of January in 2021, the day of the inauguration or the day after the inauguration of the Biden administration. And so what it required was that we do an equity assessment to ensure that we did not have barriers of entry to do business with the federal government. So every executive agency did this barrier analysis, and we did an equity assessment. We completed that in 2021, in mid 2020, like the summer of 2021. And then what we did after that was when we got the barrier, we just defined what was the equity assessment. Then we did a barrier analysis. How do we remove or mitigate barriers to working with or doing business with NASA? That was completed actually in the April-May timeframe. And we issued an equity action plan, which shows how we're going to get after those particular challenges. And then this engagement, much of what I'm doing here today with you was the third prong of that. And we are iteratively engaging with different associations, different companies, organizational groups, or targeted members of the underserved community to make sure they understand how NASA does business and look for ways to be able to have them propose and do business as a part of the NASA supply chain. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so this is focus area 1, and I'm going to talk about focus area 1, and then I'm going to, after I do that, I'm going to talk about focus area 2. So focus area 1 is equity and procurement, and this comes straight out of that equity action plan that I talked about. I talked about the goal earlier, and I talked about this barrier analysis. So this was actually by March 2022, so that's a typo there. Seeing that too, but we have expanded our outreach and training, and we are using set aside on those institutional services that we talked about. We did have the challenge, like everybody else, competing priorities and limited resources, but we have seen an increase in the number of new small businesses. We've seen an increase in our total number as far as a percentage of awards to small disadvantaged businesses. We had like a 5.0% goal. We have, I guess, about middle of the year, it was moved to 8.2% by the administration. We're right around 7.9 right now. And so we're pushing to get to that 8.2 or 8.3 by the end of this month. And we're looking good to do that. So every year, if you recall, there was a supplemental, basically it was a presidential mandate or declaration that was made that by 2025, that we would increase spend to small business by 50%. So a lot of that is what we're doing now. We're gradually increasing to that. And then one of our internal metrics was to get outreach and training to 50% by 2029. That's largely being championed by the Office of Small Business. So that pretty much, I do have on there the SCB government-wide 8.2%. The NASA is 8.2%, but the government-wide is 11%. And so, like I said, we're looking good for that goal right now. Let's go to the next slide, which gives you focus area 2. And focus area 2 in the equity action plan is equity and grants and cooperative agreements. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. Well, no, I don't see it yet.
Clicking it is just taking time to load.
Oh, okay. And these slides are heavily, there it is, heavily, there are a lot of graphics. So I think that was part of the problem when we sent these. So I apologize for that. So the goal here, it's a little bit of a softer goal because we do quite a good job of cooperative agreements, issuing them and attracting various educational institutions, but there is room for improvement in the HBCU area, the historically Black college and universities, and the minority serving institutions. So we want to increase the opportunities there. We spend about $4 to $5 billion a year conservatively in the grants and cooperative agreements area. And it's largely a combined effort with our science mission directorate that I talked about in the research area. We did complete the barrier analysis for everything else on the contracting side, but on the research side, what SMD, that's the Science Mission Directorate, has elected to do was to do they've contracted with an organization to do an in-depth analysis on given institutions to make sure that we're addressing problems and we're not treating any institution or any focus area within this as a monolith. So we know that there are certain challenges HBCUs tend to have to deal with, as well as different minority serving institutions, depending upon whether it's a Native American, whether it's Latino, and various parts of the country where there's economic considerations that we have to take into account. So we're taking a very judicious analysis to do there. We're doing our outreach and training, increasing those to 10 annually. We weren't doing very many in the grants and cooperative agreement area. We're doing many more there. SMD is doing this idea of dual anonymous peer review. So what that means is when we'll get a selected white paper in for a cooperative agreement or grant, and we will remove the names of the submitter and assign a number. And then the evaluators will evaluate those particular approaches or ideas or initiatives agnostic to the to who's submitting it. We have done studies, and studies have been done that say that when a given company or educational institution, when their name is known, sometimes there's unconscious bias. And so this is our attempt to be able to scratch that itch. And then we are launching a bridge program, which takes research that individual activities are currently doing and looks for how do we bridge that work to support either federally funded initiatives or NASA specific initiatives. And so that's a separate activity that we're doing. So let's go to the, and you can read the details on this on your own. The next slide, please. So this is a summary of the DE&I initiatives that were, there's a lot of detail to go with this, but I just want to hit it at the top level so we can get to questions here. But we have revised procurement policies to advance equity. We're doing things like eval criteria, requiring submissions of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility plans with contractor proposals. So we're giving incentive when we see companies that are either organically or through subcontracting, pushing these kinds of initiatives and measuring the quality, both quantitative and qualitative of that achievement to remove barriers and address challenges. One of the biggest barriers and challenges that we see that we're seeing some significant movement is women in positions of program management leadership or scientific leadership as a principal investigator. And so we've been spending a lot of time in that area, and we're seeing a huge amount of progress in that area. We're increasing the outreach and engagement. We talked about that one. And then we have established an equity group, representatives from each one of the centers in the procurement area to talk about what are ways that we can look at to increase equity or advance equity. And that could be organically, or it could be with our contractor community. And then there is going to be a very deliberate and intentional structured DEI&A training for people. The next slide just kind of shows you the breadth and depth of the types of outreach that we're doing, the virtual industry meetings we're having, industry association meetings that we're having, external conferences, and then we do advanced planning briefings to industry. When we do advanced planning briefings to industry, those are typically taped and made available on our OP webpage. So we had one on the institutional services and enterprise services in March. That's available. And we have a couple of others that might be of interest that are also available, as well as articles and information posted there. We have a publication each FY. We do an end of year procurement statistics publication and a year in review publication that are available there as well. And I'll leave you with that site. But year to date, we've participated in over 200 outreach. So the next slide here talks about program vignettes. So when the deputy administrator came to NASA, she wanted us to look at, basically look backwards before we look forwards. So looking backwards, what were the innovative things and the successes that we had in various major programs? So we have 6 candidate programs, SBIR, STTR, which I talked about, commercial crew, commercial low Earth orbit, development, NASA's X-59, which is a supersonic airplane, our commercial lunar payload services, and then the James Webb Space Telescope. So these will all be made available to you. These are just snapshots, but wanted you to see, in some cases, some of these programs were definitely challenged from a schedule or a cost or a technical issue. And many of these we've overcome, and 1 or 2 we're still on the CLIPS, and on the X-59, we're still working through some challenges. But you can see, hey, here was a challenge, here was the issue with respect to acquisition and program management, and here's how we met those challenges on those vignettes. And then the next chart talks a little about the acquisition forecast that I mentioned. There is a hot link at the bottom of the slide that will give you our procurement forecast. I'm happy to say that NASA is one of the top 17 out of 63 or 69 agencies for the quality of acquisition forecast. It can be sorted, and you can see by center, you can see by type of procurement. It could be sorted by date, by release, and you can see what our acquisition forecast is from 12 to 24 months there on that site. We also give you some definitions so you know what you're looking at when you're looking at this data for reference. So then we've selected 4 procurements just to kind of do a quick dive on for you to see. The first one is this transformational shared services. So this on the next slide, please. So NASA's shared services, we're in our 12th year of operation. These are services like financial management, human resources, procurement services, intelligent automation, our agency business services that are consolidated and then delivered enterprise-wide. So we're looking to say we want to transform how those services are offered to the enterprise. We're looking for innovation and new ways, best practices. We want to leverage IT and electronic means to the best of, I'll say, industry's ability to give us innovative solutions. And then you can see the draft RFP actually went out this weekend, and we are moving forward with that particular procurement, and there's information there for you to refer to. Next slide is on our administrative services. So these are the general office services that you would find in any particular organization: data management, travel, property, training. We have consolidated these services, and we're going to be procuring these enterprise-wide. And we're in the infancy of this. We're hoping to get the RFP, or at least a draft, out by the end of the first quarter of FY23. And Langley has taken the lead for issuing these. So let's go to the next one. And this is the last of the PSLs we want to share with you. This is grounds maintenance. This is, the lower level kinds of activities. We were originally targeting Ability One, or I would say more of the other abled activities to be able to deliver these services. We're now looking at, how can we best procure in a centralized manner and method these services and get more bang for our buck as opposed to everybody procuring those services individually. And then the last one that we picked up was our sustaining lunar development. That's on the next slide. It was affectionately called LETS before, because it was going to be a single award to one particular contractor. This was started as the next step broad agency announcement for human landing system. We made one award last spring to SpaceX, and we've found a way to be able to introduce additional competition, almost like a leader follower, and then ultimately have two competing designs to be able to create a capability for NASA to get to the moon and beyond if needed. In addition to this, there will also be some logistics. It's not just crew, but it could be cargo that we would then be able to fly to Gateway as a docking station and use that as a logistics kind of gateway to manage. We did award the original, the option A, original 1 to 3 contractors. The second phase went to SpaceX that I talked about last year. And then we're now expecting this draft RFP is expected to go out within the next couple of weeks, actually. And that takes care of that one. So now I'm going to wrap up, I think, with what we're doing with respect to upcoming industry engagements. So we did kind of slow down a bit because we're getting to the end of the fiscal year. So you can see I'm addressing you all here today. We do regularly meet with CODCIA quarterly. We're doing a road tour. We do that twice a year with HBCUs and minority serving institutions. And then we have a reverse industry day coming up with Ability One in November. So that brings me to the end. I do apologize for the technical difficulties with getting the slides together. I do have some time for questions. And then one of the things that Rena asked me to do was provide points of contact for each center at the small business specialist. And then we have points of contact to get to the procurement officer. So those are in the backup slides, along with each one of the vignettes that I talked about at a summary level for your review. Thank you very much.
You.
Hey, Carla,
Thank you.
before you get questions, I did want to let you know that I was able to get in. So sorry about the technical challenges.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Marvin. That's my deputy Marvin Horn, everybody that's speaking now. So if we have questions, he'll help me field those.
Well, thank you so much. That was a packed webinar or information packed webinar there. And I'm, I think the most questions we have is please share these slides because there's so much going on. Thank you so much for doing that. I do want to answer some quick questions here that have come in from the audiences. I'll start with the simpler ones. They asked, do space telescopes fall under science or space technology?
Under science largely, but there are space technologies that feed into those programs that are done in the SBIR, STTR.
Okay.
So there might be like optics pieces or something that would be in the STMD area. But if it's actually fielding a space telescope, that would be in the science area.
Perfect. One of the things that you mentioned and the number of actions that NASA has taken, do actions mean the number of awards that NASA has made in FY22? Is that, are actions and
That's
awards
correct.
synonymous?
It's both. So it would be contract awards as well as modifications. So anytime that we would obligate money or issue a change or that kind of thing, that's considered an action, a contract action. And when we say action, it's over $25,000, or I'm sorry, it's over $150,000.
Okay. And what's the average time that NASA takes to make an award?
So that's an interesting question. So Marvin is working a PALT project for us right now. We're trying to baseline our average procurement administrative lead time. So it ranges widely from as little as 45 to 60 days to, if it's a major, like a major space flight system, it could be as long as a year and a half. So if there were certain things you wanted to ask about, like I could talk to you about, an SBIR would take about 60 to 90 days. Or, you know, if it's a BAA, probably 90 to 180 days. But if it's a full on, you know, human space flight, or, you know, a new space suit, or like a mobile launcher or something like that, that'd be closer to the 1 year mark.
Okay. And as there's another question here from the audience, are the products as services cloud-based? And if so, who is the cloud service provider for NASA?
Okay, I'm going to ask Marvin to handle that one. If Marvin, did you hear that question?
Absolutely, I sure did. So we do have, NASA does use a lot of cloud-based products through AWS and also Microsoft. But I would also point you in the direction of our OCIO community to find out more about the cloud-based services that we do utilize, because we utilize through the SOUP. I know people are familiar with the SOUP contract, which is the GWAC big contract, best in class contract. And so we utilize that to get to our cloud providers.
And while we're on the big topic, does NASA have a preferred vehicle that you procure products, and a preferred vehicle for services?
So for the IT, of course, the preferred is our own BIC, right? But we actually utilize a lot of different IT contracts. But for services, this is actually where we're getting much smarter in this area to see what services are available from a GWAC perspective, as we really stand up our product service lines, as Carla talked about earlier. Some of the things we have found out as we really shifted towards the utilization of GWACs for some of the local services, as we have formed those in the product service lines, either regional or enterprise, is some of the GWAC locations do not actually have good viable vendors that's interested in the work. So we've actually been communicating with GSA, for example, it's grounds maintenance in some of the different locations. We've been communicating with GSA to actually improve or increase the industry quantity of interested vendors to be able to actually set some of our services aside for GWACs as we continue to move forward. So we don't really have a preferred GWAC vehicle, but we are actually really encouraging industry to get on a GWAC vehicle, especially related to the service that you may be interested in, and then also to communicate which vehicles you are on with the local contracting officers or local technical teams, as you find out more information about the local services that you may be interested in.
Thank you for that. One of the common things that we hear, and this is not unique to NASA, but perhaps more associated with NASA, is that new contractors find it very difficult to get into and contract with NASA because of the past performance requirements. What is NASA doing in order to not put self-inflicted barriers and ask for onerous experiences that unless you're working with NASA, you cannot get that experience? So what is NASA doing to help with that?
So we've started on a couple of our procurements, doing something that DoD had started a few years back, and it's looking at past performance as a part of responsibility determination. So in some cases, we're not asking for past performance information. In other cases, we're relaxing the past performance to like a go, no go versus the, the various different discriminators of past performance. What we're finding, like most activities, is past performance is not often a discriminator. And this, once again, we talked about barriers to entry. In some cases, it could be a barrier to entry. So we are on a case-by-case basis trying to look for ways to be able to relax that standard. What I would encourage any and all of you that are concerned about that is, when you see that kind of a thing on an RFP, please, you can come to me as SPE or Marvin as the deputy SPE, or to the center that's issuing an RFP and ask the question, or offer another way or another solution to be able to get at that problem, because it generally is a responsibility thing. And it's less about how well was, because most times it's very good, the past performance that we get. It's a matter of, is it neutral or is it very good? Meaning you didn't have it, or is it very good?
Thank you for that. And speaking of the way of selecting, is NASA moving more and more towards phased proposals, or are you using the traditional, you provide us your approach and everything all at once? Because that does get very expensive for industry.
Yeah, so right now we're doing traditional, but we are looking for ways, and we plan to engage. We had hoped to do it this year, but we had so many programmatic mission things going on, we couldn't do it. To look at more innovative ways to be more inclusive, and things like oral proposals coming in, and maybe a two-step process where you don't have to do the whole cost proposal. You could just give us the solution, and those that have the good solution, we look at the cost. But those are all under review right now, so we have not employed anything. We're just looking at what are innovative ways that we could use. So if anyone has examples, either other agencies you've worked with where there have been a better way to skin that cat, or a better way to get after that problem, we're happy to entertain those. And if you wouldn't mind, Rena, if they send them to you, could you send them to me? That would be great.
Absolutely. Yes, please feel free to email us, and we will pass that information along to you. Absolutely. So here's there are a few more questions that have come in, and these are folks that are providing STEM instructions for college and middle school students, and they're wondering, how can they get NASA funding? Is there anything available to them?
Okay, so we just awarded a product service line for the Office of Science and Technology Education. Mike Kincaid is the associate administrator that leads that group. And what I would say is that's what they're working on, right? So we just awarded that contract. If you have specific names of people that I can give Mike's information to, or if you want to, we can answer the question in writing and provide you with Mike's contact information. But there definitely are ways to do that. And we did receive an increased funding amount this fiscal year. I think it went up by 20 million or 40 million, our STEM budget. So we expect additional funding to be provided this next fiscal year. So this is an area of interest for not just NASA, but for the administration and also for the economy. We see one of the objectives you could see for NASA was to be able to stimulate the growth of the economy and the space, science, technology industry. And it has to start with STEM. It has to start with our students and getting them interested.
Very cool. Thank you for that. And we'll pass on the contact information to your team.
Okay, thanks.
There is a question here, and you can feel free to pass, but I'll ask anyways. Do you anticipate the NTSS pre-solicitation to be published before 2023?
I'm going to let Marvin answer that one. He's been working closely at that one, and I think we can answer.
So yeah, I'm trying to get to the date to see when it is. What did we just show? Okay, so we have the draft RFP actually hit the street, I think, Friday. So if you haven't seen that on the NTSS draft RFP, that actually went out Friday. So please go check sam.gov so you can see and provide any feedback to help us better that final RFP. And then, of course, you can see the schedule there from, we're looking at a year, but that's typically what we post for our larger acquisitions. But the team is a dedicated team, so we're hopeful that we can actually turn that around much faster than that with a dedicated team. And so that's kind of what I'll offer right now, because we are on schedule right now, but the draft RFP is out there. So please let us know what your thoughts are on that draft RFP. So
the final RFP is going to go out in December though, right?
Yes, that's the plan.
Yeah, so the final RFP will be out before the first of the year. And the other thing I want to draw your attention to, anyone that's interested in that particular requirement, that you'll see some different clauses in there. Not only the DE&I clauses that I talked about, but there are also clauses that talk about technology refresh or innovation. And we would love to get, like Marvin said, your comment on those clauses, because we're looking for ways to incentivize and stimulate that. And if there are better ways for us to get at that, then we would love to get comments and engage with that, engage on that with you.
Right, and I'll add, Carla, I'll add on that. I'm sorry, I thought they said award. I didn't hear the final RFP. Please, we're going to have a pre-solicitation conference coming up, and we're actually going to do that out of DC. So you'll see that in the draft RFP. So if you can attend that, that's another opportunity to learn more about it as a team walks you through the pre-solicitation documents, and then also address any questions that you may have. So that's a great event. We are going to do it in person and virtually. And we picked the DC area just because, with this, we're really leveraging the virtual capability. There's a lot of businesses in that area that may be interested also, but of course, across the country. And so that's another plug I want to put in for everyone.
Will that be in person only, or is it a hybrid in person and virtual?
It's a hybrid.
Very good. Okay, so for those who cannot travel to the DC area can still make it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're finding a lot of utility in the hybrid. Those that can travel, get a lot of it out of the in person, but we can do a lot of engagement virtually and be more inclusive. And so going forward, a lot of our activities are going to be they're going to be hybrid.
Thank you for doing that. And I know I want to be respectful of your time, but I do want to ask a closing question. Well, it's not closing, one before closing. But where has the industry failed you? How can industry do better to meet your expectations?
So I don't want to say failed us. And I can go another 10 minutes if I need to, because I feel like we lost 10 minutes trying to get the slides together. I really apologize about that. But what I would say that we've been disappointed, maybe is probably a better word, is this idea that we go through a procurement and we believe we're being open kimono, or that's probably not a good way to say it, but we believe we're actually sharing information in a two-way manner. We get to the end, we make an award, and we are getting, I don't want to call it frivolous, but we are getting a number of protests pretty much on everything that we award. We generally, I don't think we've lost any of them, but what it does do is it protracts the process for transition, right? And so that makes it harder for us to transition to the new contractor if an incumbent is unseated. It oftentimes, of course, increases the prices from a taxpayer perspective. I do understand from the losing contractor, if it's the incumbent, it's frustrating because you would have potentially lost, but it also means you have to hold that team together. There's just a number of challenges that we're seeing to what we consider just the sheer number of protests. That's not to say everybody has a right to protest, but we're just seeing a trend. In fact, I was talking with the deputy administrator. We're going to likely be trying to get some groups of industry partners at all sizes and levels to engage on what can we do to be more productive. Are there not enough opportunities that people are, grabbing onto every single thing? And what can we do to be more flexible, or to offer more, I'll just use the word opportunity, so that we don't get bogged down with these iterative challenges or protests, because it costs the company money, it costs us time and money. It isn't necessarily an efficient way to do procurement. So interested, that's kind of like, I don't want to start a fight, but that's one of the things that I just would say we're a little bit disappointed. I think over the last year and a half, we do understand during COVID, we kind of pulled back with respect to engagement like everybody did, but we really are trying to engage more, bending over backwards, either in a hybrid or a face-to-face. I'm having a lot of one-on-one meetings, a lot of association meetings, a lot of speaking engagement, so that people know we want to be accessible. We want to make sure that if you have questions about requirements up until the time we release the final RFP, you can engage with us. And then even after we release the final RFP, you can engage through the contracting officer, and you could still have some dialogue. Well, it won't be as open, obviously, but we want to make sure that all of our, I'll say, interested parties in NASA procurement feel that they can engage and they can get the information they need. On the flip side of that, from what can NASA do better, that's where we think we have the most opportunity, is for the program side of the house to be able to reach out and be more accessible about our requirements, about what we're looking for, what kind of solutions we're trying to I'll say foster industry to propose. And then one other thing, we're thinking about moving away from performance-based statements of work and more to statements of objectives. That's back in the 90s. If those of you that have been around as long as I have, we used to do that, and the contractor would propose the statement of work, and then we would get a more robust solution, and it would leave more room for innovation in what you proposed as an offer or as a statement of work, as opposed to doing the performance-based statement of work where you're responding to the performance and then you do the QASP, and it's more about what's measurable. So any feedback on those kinds of things would be, happy to have. Marvin, do you have anything to comment on that?
No, I think your points were spot on. A different topic I would bring up for industry is as we look at, because you'll see it, for example, in the NTSS, there's a lot of requests for different innovation, different ways of doing business. How do we be better suited in the future as we go forward, and especially leveraging technology, as we all have learned from the COVID virtual and hybrid environments. So I would actually caution industry to really think about proposals and how you respond to proposals in that environment, just based on experience I've seen, is typically from a NASA's RFP, we identify what the current, or historical workforce is as far as quantities, locations, and then we're looking for, how can we do this better in the future, more streamlined. And what sometimes I think industry miss is they provide that in solution, but they don't necessarily really address or provide how do you get to the end solution from our current state. And so, of course, that's a risk assessment as we're evaluating those proposals. And so we've seen that quite a bit across industry, where they do not address how they're going to, where those efficiencies are, how they determine those efficiencies, and how the work from a customer perspective will still be managed and met to enable the mission to be achieved while they're, on their journey to get to that future state. So I would add that, just as a reminder, when you're writing those technical proposals and also those cost proposals, that those bases of estimates address, how are you going to address the gap from today to tomorrow.
Thank you. That's very useful tip. In terms of emerging innovative technologies, a lot of times there are companies, newer companies that want to get into government contracting. They have emerging technologies they want to present, but they don't necessarily show up in the form of an RFP for them to respond. What advice would you give to these newer companies with emerging technologies? How do they approach NASA and present their solutions?
So the first, we try very hard to, get that. Sometimes we do requests for information, but we try very hard to get the announcement of the procurement out there at sam.gov as early as possible. And for the most part, we do a draft RFP. So the time between say an RFI or there's going to be a requirement to the draft RFP would be a great time to engage with NASA about, this is what I'd like to offer. How do I do that? You still do have another window once the draft hits. It's usually about a 30 to 45 day window, so you've got to mobilize quickly. But then that's when you would come in and say, hey, have you considered this? Now, I know we ask for responses and questions in writing, but to the extent that you ask for a face-to-face meeting or it could be a phone call or a video Teams meeting, sometimes those are more effective. And the other thing I want to say is you should engage at the lowest possible level. So that would be down at the center. But from time to time, we do have centers that don't want to engage. And if that's the case, then I would ask for them to come to headquarters to me or Marvin. We will, do it non-attribution, but we will reach out and I would say assist or facilitate those kinds of engagements. You also have small business, Office of Small Business as another route to go. But don't wait until the final RFP comes out, because at that point, there's, we should be having proposals and everything coming in. So give us a little bit of lead time. One of the other things we're going to try to do better, we have the forecast out there, right? So if there's a way for you to see something on the forecast and say, hey, I'm interested in that, even if you're 12 months ahead, 12 to 24 months ahead, engage then. It's not unusual for companies to come in and talk to us 24 months before they know a contract's getting ready to expire, right? It's not necessarily a new procurement, but it's more of a follow-on that's going to take place. But we would ask you to take the initiative to reach out.
And what, in your experience, what do larger companies do more effectively in terms of reaching out and business development than you see what smaller companies do? What differences do you see that works better?
Well, there's a natural, I'll say, competitive advantage for most of the large companies because we're already doing business with them, right? So they already have a battle rhythm for, I'll say, engagement and discussion. So if I already have 4 contracts with you, I'm just going to be honest with you, they'll come in and say they want to talk about one of the 4 contracts, and it turns into talking about, future activities or things that they're working on. And then therefore we create a dialogue and there's a relationship, right? That's just the way that works. So I would encourage from a small business perspective that, or a company that doesn't do business with NASA regularly, to come and visit and try to start to develop those relationships, even if there's no procurement on the table right now. Like one of the things that happened with me was I had a handful of defense contractors, most of them the smallish category that I did business with when I was at Missile Defense Agency. Well, they knew I came to NASA. There was no procurement on the table, but they started to visit me and say, hey, listen, we're going to be looking for these kinds of procurements. We're going to be, where it wasn't like it was a hostile meeting or anything, but they're saying, hey, I want to stay in touch with you. I'm interested in NASA procurements. And now that takes an investment of time, right? And in some cases it could be travel, but we do virtual meetings. So I would just say, and that's where large businesses, they have more resources, they have more people to be able to maintain those relationships. But when that happens, when we know that there's someone that's interested in, say, a given technology area or a given program, we can also send things direct. Or if we're going to pulse industry for feedback, those are the people that we know, we have their information, and we'll pulse them. There's a database that the Office of Small Business maintains. Would encourage anybody that has not done business with NASA to reach out to them, whether large or small, because they will put your name in that database, whether you have a contract with NASA or not, with all of your capability information and your areas of interest. And that's where we go to do our market research. So you want to make sure that you're included there as well. And Marvin, Marvin has been with NASA longer than me, so I just want to make sure I didn't leave anything else, Marvin, that I might have missed.
No, I think you put on some really great points. What I would add would be, is you kind of lightly touched it, is getting down to the lowest common denominator, excuse me, where the work actually meets at the center. That is huge. And so what we find from the large businesses are, of course, they're very familiar with that because they bring on, people with previous NASA experience. So they know the different work elements at the different centers and maybe what some potential future avenues may be there. So what I would encourage companies with emerging technologies is to get out and meet the NASA people through, first coming in through Office of Small Business programs to try to reach contacts that way, of course, coming in through Office of Procurement, and then also anyone on the technical side that you can get in touch with, or that we can put you in touch with. And then also talking about those technologies, because there's a lot of different avenues that Carla talked about. So of course we have contracts, we also have NRAs, NASA research opportunities, AO. So there's a lot of different avenues, and of course grants and cooperative agreements, depending on what that technology or environment you may be supporting. That where if it's a technology that NASA can leverage, and those technical community members can see what that technology is and learn more about it, then that may also give them the energy to seek one of those different avenues based on getting some demonstration of that technology. But I think the key is getting the information out there, right? We also talked a little bit about the SBIR program and SBTT program. TTR program, that's a NASA, $200 million a year approximately through those small business innovation programs, where we've been able to, really leverage that from industry and getting out and understanding what industry is doing. And so really just being on the forefront of those calls and participating in meetings like this, I think is some of the things that really benefit, and just doing that legwork of getting out and understanding what NASA's needs are and how your technology may be able to fill that gap. Thank you.
Fantastic. And we are 10 minutes over. So I'll just ask you for closing remarks, encouragement to the small business community to work with NASA. Final comments.
So I'd like Marvin to address this as well, but from my perspective, we believe that small businesses are what's going to drive NASA to the next phase as we go with what we call the Artemis generation, you know, to the moon and to Mars. And so we want a very close relationship with small business. That's where innovation typically occurs. It isn't with the larger businesses, and we know that, and we have statistics that show that. So don't feel like you're isolated and you can't engage, or you don't know where to start. You can always start with me. Send me an email. You have my information, or Marvin. I'm not saying that I can answer your question, but I will get you over to the right place so that you can get a question answered. But don't use I'll say the intimidation of the large NASA and where do I go to begin to deter you from starting that conversation, because we believe that you have so much to offer, and we need everybody in this to be able to meet the challenges that NASA is going to have to deal with in the future. So we want your business. We want to work with you. And sometimes it's just about finding the right place and the right connection to bring that to fruition. And then Marvin, I wanted to give you an opportunity as well.
Oh, no, appreciate it. Yeah, I would say just kind of piggybacking on what Carla just stated, small business drives the work that NASA does. It's a key initiative where NASA wants to reach out as much as we can to find those small businesses to continue to enable NASA to achieve the great success that it has. And then also too, just kind of pulling on that piece that Carla just talked about is, contacting us. But I would say don't stop with us, right? Because there's so many more people that's part of the acquisition community within NASA, and so many dollars go through the Office of Procurement or through acquisition instruments. So don't stop with us, but find other resources that you can leverage. And there's through the website, I think it's chart 25 or 26, it gives the Office of Procurement a link where you can do business with NASA and find out not just Carla and I, but also the local procurement offices, because that's where actual contracts and instruments are actually executed at the actual local level. So getting to know not only procurement, but also the small business community, and then also the technical community there. NASA does a lot of outreach, and it has a great support system to enable small businesses. So I would just challenge you, and excited for the opportunity for you to be able to leverage some of those to continue to grow your business. Thank you.
Exactly. So the other piece that we didn't mention was we talked about Mike Kincaid. He meets with small businesses, and he's always happy to do that as the Office of STEM. And the Science Mission Directorate, they meet individually with small businesses, and the STMD, the Space Technology Mission Directorate, you can still go to them. They have groups of people to engage with to educate you. Now, with respect to Aero's the smallest probably of the individual mission areas. They don't have all the resources that you would expect them to have for engagement. And then when you start to talk about space operations, they do have the most budget, the biggest budget, the most number of people, but they also have the biggest number of challenges. So sometimes it's harder to get to them. But like Marvin said, if you go and you enter at the central level, you're more likely to get that level of information there, as opposed to coming to the mission directorate level when you're talking about space operations or the exploration systems division of the mission area.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. This has been, again, amazing presentation. You're getting a lot of kudos in the chat box. So thank you for all you do. And, we'll share the additional questions that have come in. We'll share those with you if you want to reach out directly to the audience members as well. We would appreciate that. Again,
Okay.
Thank you all for joining on behalf of the Asian American Chamber of Commerce. We appreciate NASA and the entire team being here. Thank you for your support, and participants, thank you for you all being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rena. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.